back to my channel. Today I want us to talk about the basics of photography and videography. The principles that we're going to go over today will classify for both photography and videography, but I want to go over the trifecta, the triangle, the exposure triangle. These principles apply to no matter what camera you have. I'm going to be using the Canon Rebel T6 for demonstration purposes, but these three principles go with whether you're using Nikon, whether you're using Sony, whatever else you're using. Whether I'm shooting right now with my Canon ERSR, and same principles apply. These are the basic principles for getting out of manual mode. Okay. Yes, you can. All of the cameras do have a automatic mode, and you can shoot in automatic mode to your heart's desire. However, if you do want to be able to shoot manual, if you have desire to shoot manual, if you want to have more control over what you're shooting, more artistic control, creative control, this is going to be the tutorial video for you to watch. So there's 3 items that go into this trifecta, this exposure triangle, right? There's ISO, there's aperture, and then there's your shutter speed. Okay? All 3 of these things work together to make a great photo, or a photo in general. I am going to be hesitant to say great photo or bad photo, because it is ultimately whatever you're trying to go to, whatever your goal is for your photo. So it may be quote unquote bad to me, but maybe that was the vibe, that was the stylistic version of this photo you were trying to do. So I do want to try to avoid saying best and worst, but we get the gist of what we're talking about here. So all 3 of these things, aperture, ISO, shutter, all of them control light. They all have a component that controls light. They also have a secondary purpose. And these 3 can work together based off of what is your primary focus, what is your non-negotiable. Okay? So if your focus is your non-negotiable, and you need to have your focus sharp on one particular person or a group of people or one particular item, that the aperture is your non-negotiable, then the other 2 will support that. Okay? If your non-negotiable is shutter speed because you're shooting something in fast pace, or you're doing something in slow motion, that will discover, the shutter is your non-negotiable. And then the aperture and ISO will help you along the way. Okay? Lighting, if you have the best lighting, then you don't need to worry about ISO. So they work intangible with each other. So let's take it step by step. Let's take it down bit by bit so we know what each one does. Okay? So your ISO, that's the base. That is going to control your lighting, and that ranges. So the ISO can range from like 100 to 6400, even higher depending on your camera body. So depending on the body that you have, that you're working with, like I said, this particular body is a Rebel T6. This one goes up to 6400 as far as the ISO number. My ERSR that I'm shooting with can go a lot higher. That I can't remember the number for the ISO for the Canon ERSR, but it's pretty darn high because that's a pretty darn expensive camera. Okay, but so the ISO is controlled by the body of your camera. That's controlled by what your body can do. Sony, Nikon, they have different bodies, different price ranges. that is a selling point. Okay, that would be a selling point depending on what it is. So, with that being said, like I said, 100 to 6400. The lower the number, the less light you have. So, at 100 ISO, your lighting is not bringing in that much light to this photo. This photo is not going to have that much light coming from the ISO component. Okay? If you're at 6400, you're going to get all the light you want. This is going to be the brightest and the most light in this photo. However, that comes at a caveat. That comes with a high noise rate or grain, speckles, all speckles in the photo. So if you ever take a photo and you zoom all the way into the photo and all you just see is specks and dots, that's what a photo will look at the highest rate of the ISO. Okay. The lower that ISO, the less that would be. The lower that ISO, the less of that noise sensitivity, noise reduction, noise grain. All those words mean the same thing. Okay. So, like I said, the higher that will be there. The lower that is, the less of that. So if you do have natural light, or if you have external lights going on in your shoot, then your ISO could be low. If you don't have that, if you're in a darker room, then your ISO would be higher, would need to be higher. Use that with the caveat of there will be grain if it's too high. Now, on a higher quality camera, you can go really high and that won't be a problem. So you just kind of got to work with what your camera body gives you. Okay? Aperture. Aperture is the range for aperture could be 1.4 all the way up. Most of the time you'll hit 1.4 to 11. Can you go higher to 11? Yes, but then it's going to be really dark. The aperture is controlled by your camera lens. Okay, it's controlled by the camera lens. So this particular lens that I have right here is a kit lens. Okay, it's an 18 by 55 kit lens, and the aperture on this lens is 3.5 to 5.6. Okay. The selling points for different cameras, for different lenses, selling points for different lenses is what the range, whether it is a range or whether it is a steady 50, which are great, 50 lenses, or this one, I have one here, it's a 24 lens. Great, but then the aperture range. So when you are looking at camera lenses, you do want to pay attention to the aperture range. Like I said, this kit lens is 3.5 to 5.6. Okay? And the lower the number, the wider your aperture is. The higher the number, the less aperture, the narrow that your light that lets in light. So if you look at the lens, you'll see this circle. Okay, it's at the widest point at 3.5. Okay, when you go continually going up to 5.6, that becomes a tighter, narrow, and lets in less light. Okay, that has purpose for depth of field. Okay, if you want the shot to be completely in focus, no blurriness, no stylistic look in the back, it's just everything sharp image, then you want that aperture to be higher. If you want it to be some depth of field, some blurriness, something called bokeh, then you want that f-stop to be, the aperture or f-stop, you can hear it both ways, you want that to be lower. So I'm going to put on the screen now an image that will explain this a little bit easier. It's a image of a cup with some string lights in the back, right? So here at f2.0, aperture 2.0, you see the cup is in focus, but then the lights, you can't really see the lights. You see the circles for the colors, the bokeh. That's a bokeh image, okay? Nice image. It has its place in the world. 5.6, aperture 5.6 or f5.6, you can start seeing a little bit of the strings. It's not completely in focus, but it does have some type of bokeh, some type of blurriness there that has a place in this world too. F10, everything's in focus. Everything is on point. Everything is clear. Okay? That is where you probably want to do, if you're doing a family photo of 10 people, you probably want your shot to be at the highest aperture that you can go to, for the simple fact you want all their faces in focus. But if you want grandma's face to be in focus and all the other faces to be blurred out because that's just the stylistic view that you're looking for, then you will see this f2.0 where the cup, in this example, is grandma, right? That's focused, and then all the other family members are blurred out. So that's where your aperture comes into play. Depth of field, whether you want focused or not. Okay. When you put those two things together, the aperture and the ISO, right? We'll take a look at shutter in a second, but if you take those two, the focus or the non-negotiable is the aperture, because you want that stylistic, you want that sharp look for the family members where you want all of them in focus. So therefore, you're going to look at a higher f-stop number, f11, that higher number, right? You're looking at that number, which lets in less light, which means it's darker, right? So now where am I going to get this light? Because they're all in focus, but I can't see anybody. That's pointless, right? Then that's when your ISO comes into play, and you'll have your ISO at 800, at 400, at 1600. You're letting in more light to come into play at that ISO level, right? That's helpful. That helps you. That works for you. Now, having external lighting is definitely recommended, but you may not have it starting out, so we're not even going to talk about bringing in external light into this scenario at this moment. We're just strictly looking at what you have from the camera itself. Okay? So now, the third part of this triangle is going to be your shutter speed. So your shutter speed is just standard. The shutter speed is not based off of your lenses, it's not based off of your camera. It's just standard built into all cameras. There's no changing of that, or whether the shutter would be better or not, or different ranges or not. That's just based off of standardness. So your shutter would go from, like, it's a fraction. So there's always going to be a 1 / a number. So you might just hear people say, oh, my shutter speed is at 125. It's 1/125. Okay? So it goes from 1/15 all the way up to like 1/1000. Okay? So the lower fraction, that 1/15th, right? That's for slow motion, and actually it could be lower than that. It could be 0, because there's times, or really low, because there's times where people want to do, like, if you see those light photography where they'll take like a flashlight and they'll spell out the word love, their shutter is completely open for a long period of time to capture all of that in slow motion. Okay? So the lower that shutter speed number is, the slower time it takes for that shutter to close. So when I'm talking about the shutter, and maybe I'll zoom in on here if I can, you'll see this little click, the little mirror thing. That's your shutter. When you hear that click click sound, that's the shutter. Okay? So when you do your shutter, the lower it is, the slower it takes for that shutter to close. Okay? The faster, the higher that number is, the faster your shutter closes. There could be purposes of that if you're doing sports, if you're trying to capture sports in a fast pace. If you're trying to capture sports in a slower pace, that's one of those reasons that you have your shutter look the way it does. Slower flash. The lower that number, the lower 1/over number for your shutter, the more light you bring in. The higher that number, the less light you bring in. So now that is another light source if your aperture is your priority. Okay? So therefore, if your aperture is the priority, your ISO, you don't want it to be too grainy. You can have it a little bit lower. Then you can have your shutter at a lower speed. There's a caveat to that shutter at a lower speed though. There's a caveat to everything. The lower the speed, it does, like I said, it takes capturing all of that at the, fastest, but shakiness comes into play. You can be holding your camera. Let me actually put this back on here so I don't let too much dust in. You could be holding your camera as really tight as you think you can, but you're going to initially move at times. You're going to move naturally. And so the lower the number, the worse that moving really affects your photo. So if you are holding your camera, I strongly recommend keeping your shutter speed around 125, around 100. Anything below 100, you 100% need to have your camera on a tripod. 100% on a tripod. So it's not moving. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay. This is what the trifecta is. Okay. This is what the triangle of exposure is. All of these take into consideration to make your photo this great photo that you have. Okay. Like I said in the beginning, it could very much be a scenario of you're doing this on purpose. Okay. It's very much in this scenario of I want this particular look, so hey, I'm going to go ahead and shoot with a lower aperture because I want grandma in focus and the rest of the family out of focus. That's the way that I want to. That's the way I want the camera to look. It's all about what your goal is for your photo. Okay? Aperture, ISO, shutter speed. They work intangible together. You have to first identify what is your non-negotiable. What's the most important piece? What is the non-negotiable? What's the boss and the two people are the employees? Think of it however you got to think of it as what's important to you for your shot. That goes into pre-shooting. We have to plan our shots. We have to plan our shots. This logic does go for photography and video. Same components go into it. And I always, in high school, I dabbled a little bit in this in high school. before I started taking it a little bit more serious 10 years ago. But in high school I took a film class, and I did not like storyboarding. I did not like storyboarding. And I now see the benefit of it, actually doing this on a regular basis and doing this as a business. Storyboarding is really important. So it's really important to plan out your stuff, plan out your shoot, so you know what settings you need to be cautious of, so you know what look you're trying to get to. It's very important that you try to get your shot done in camera. If you're shooting in RAW, which your camera can shoot in RAW, it can shoot in JPEG, it can shoot in both RAW and JPEG. If you're shooting in RAW, you can go ahead and edit your photos. You can edit your photos in a photo editor, Lightroom, Photoshop, and you can manipulate things. However, you can't edit a bad quality photo. So you can't. It's not going to work. So you really want to try to get your photos done in camera as much as you possibly can, so it looks the best as you most possibly can. Okay. If you want to shoot in JPEG, that's fine and give you immediate, but you can't manipulate the photo in those photo editors like you can in RAW. Manual focus will give you that ability. Manual focus is where, if you are trying to take photography seriously, manual focus is where you need to be. There are two other manual type of modes on a camera, and that's aperture priority and that is shutter priority. Okay. Canon calls it AV and TV. I know Nikon calls it something different, and I'm sure Sony calls it something different too, but you get the gist of what we're talking about. There are two other priorities, aperture priority and shutter priority. And if you're just now getting into manual focus or manual shooting, then I would say take a stab at, aperture priority, shutter priority, so that way you only focus on getting the other two right. So you can baby step it out until you get to full manual mode. I also think you need to make sure that you are practicing. You can hear me, you can watch all these other videos on YouTube, but practice, 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 because that's ultimately going to make you better. It may not make you perfect, but is anyone really perfect? So it will definitely make you better though. And it doesn't have to be nothing. You don't really need to have, it's nice to have people to shoot, but you can take a picture of objects, right? I have an urn. This is my cousin. I have an urn on my desk that I keep on my desk. You can go ahead and shoot that. Put it on the desk, on the table, and go in and shoot. Change the settings and shoot. And when you're shooting, I do recommend going up one stop for all of these, going down one stop for all of these. So that way you're not just changing it drastically up, changing it drastically down. You can actually see where things change and how things progress. You can actually see what you're doing and how you can make it work for yourself. You can make it work for you if, focusing on here, on whether you want to get the bokeh look, how to perfect that, whether you want everything, the whole thing and the whole object in focus, how you want to perfect that. You can work on that. And so ultimately, that is what you do, practice. I can go through some more stuff on here, you know, lighting videos. We can then talk also about the different menu options on the camera. We can go through all of that. Leave a comment if you do want me to go into that kind of thing, those kinds of tutorials as well. I do want to do more of these tutorials where I show you how to actually edit the photos in Photoshop and in Lightroom. Both of those are Adobe products that I do use. So let me know in the comments below as well if you want me to do those. I will link the cameras that I'm using, one that I'm using to shoot, and then this T6 camera that I truly believe is a good starter camera if you're still trying to figure this thing out. It's around $400, $500, and it is a good camera. Yes, it's inexpensive, but it is a good camera. You can get a lot of stuff out of here. You just gotta learn the camera, and I do think this is a nice price point for you to start. It does come with the kit lens, so it does come with this 18 to 55 kit lens that will come with the camera. Once you have a good body, a good camera body, you can then buy other lenses. I have a 24, I have a 50. I have this one here is what, 75 to 300. You can then just keep buying lenses. As long as you stay with the same body company, you'll have the same availability for lenses for DSLRs. So Canon's DSLRs are all EF lenses, lens mount, so you can use all of your EF lenses on that. The ERSR that I'm shooting with is a mirrorless camera, so they have an RF mount, but you can get an adapter, which works perfectly fine with then all of your EF lenses. Or you can buy RF lenses, which is one that I have on here now. You have RF lens that you could use on your camera for the ESRs. All that to say is focus on getting your settings, your basics. Focus on getting your camera settings together. You're practicing on that, and utilize your kit lens. You can get some really good stuff with this kit lens and this starter camera. Okay, practice, get your settings right, and then build from there. All these other fancy cameras, they do great things. They make it easier for you. But you don't want to start with an expensive camera and you don't know the basics of your settings. Okay? So, with that being said, if you like this video, please like it, please share it. Hit the notification bell so you can see when I put out other videos. And if you have any other suggestions for videos that you want me to do, or if you have any questions on anything I discuss in here, feel free to add comments to them. I will check the comments. I will comment on your comment. Maybe some other people can help you, help each other. We can do this as a group. We can do this as a family. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and get your notifications on. Thank you. Until next time.